Well, I'm still working on trying to figure out whether or not I am. You know that.
Well,
Self-esteem
you think
issues
you're working on that,
are-
but yes, go on.
But when I was a little girl, I was always making things, and I remember I was convinced that I could make perfume from rose petals, baby oil, and talcum powder, which resulted in a sort of very light pink, goopy, gluey mess. But I would do it regularly. We also had these shrubs in front of the house when I was living in Howard Beach, Queens, that have those little tiny, I bet Alyssa Altman knows the answer to this, they're little tiny, they're not edible, but they're little tiny, like kind of cherries, and I see people nodding. I don't know what they're called. What are they called?
Ground cherries? No,
So I would take them and I would sort of squish them and add them, and yeah, I was.
Wow, I'm learning this for the first time. This is great. Do you remember the first piece of visual art you made?
Yes. Well, I remember two. I don't know which one came first, both of which created tremendous angst. I made a Halloween decoration that my mother put in the window of our house on Staten Island. And I was very upset because I felt like the pumpkin was misproportioned. And the fact that she put it in the window meant that I was going to be humiliated by the entire neighborhood for my pumpkin that was out of proportion. And then the other is something I've written about in a visual essay in Look Both Ways, which was a drawing that I did. And it was earlier because it had to be around like kindergarten or first grade. And I had a problem with the letter H. I couldn't do the line across straight.
I can't do anything straight.
Fair enough. But that's when it went from Deborah to Debbie, because I wouldn't have to draw the H.
Oh my God, this is great. I am taking notes. Wow.
Clearly Roxane did not read Look Both Ways.
Come on, but I didn't forget that story. That's a great story. And so how do you go from that into entering the design world as an adult?
There was no linear path. I became a designer, or I said I was going to be a designer in 1983 when I graduated college, and realized that was my only marketable skill, because I really wanted to be a journalist or a painter, but really had no skill set for either, because of the time that I had spent at SUNY Albany working on my student newspaper as the editor, who was also responsible for the layout and paste. Is Rob Elstein here? Yeah, there. He's the man that gave me my first job. SUNY Albany. He was the editor-in-chief of the paper. I ended up becoming the editor of Aspects, which was the arts and feature section, and had to put the paper together, and that became my way into the world of design.
You've been in the world of design for quite some time, and at some point you decided, I'm going to start a podcast. It wasn't called podcasting back then, it was called internet radio. It was live.
It was live.
And people had to tune in.
People not only tuned in, but I also asked my friends to call in, because it was a live internet radio network. And Lisa Grant is here, so she knows, because she was many persona that called in.
So tell us about the first year of Design Matters and what you were trying to do with the project.
Well, the first year of Design Matters was a complete experiment. I was doing the show live from my desk at Sterling Brands in the Empire State Building, so I was very legitimately able to say broadcasting live from the Empire State Building. There's Cindy Rosenshine, who knows, she was there at Sterling at the time. Thank you for being here. And I was doing it at the time because I had put so much of my life and my heart and my time into building Sterling. And because it was really the first time in my life that I was ever really professionally successful at anything, that from 1995 when I got to Sterling until 2005 when I started the podcast, I had all but given up all of the sort of unsuccessful but very creative things that I had been trying to do at the time. So no more writing, literally stopped writing in my journal, stopped writing the bad poetry, that was a good thing. Stopped drawing, stopped making, 3-chord guitar songs, and dedicated myself to this business that I was building and was getting this sort of constant affirmation from. And it became a kind of drug because it felt so good to finally be successful after being so unsuccessful for so long. And then around 2003, 2004, I was like, who am I? What am I doing? Why am I doing this? It might have coincided with the fact that I turned 40, and I was kind of desperate to do something creative again. And then I got this cold call from Voice America, which is different from Voice of America. Voice America, and they offered me, I thought they were offering me a job. I think folks that listen to the show know this. I thought they were offering me, I was imagining myself sort of one of the Ronson family DJing, being, with the headphones and being uber cool. And it was like a Ronson family, John Corbett from Northern Exposure love child. And I'd be sort of waxing sentimental about the state of the world, which is kind of what I was trying to do with those early monologues from the first 100 episodes. But they weren't offering me that opportunity. They were really offering me an opportunity to pay them to produce a radio show. That's how desperate I was to do something creative. It's like, okay, I'm gonna give them $5,000, which was a lot of money, $5,000 to produce a radio show that I can make from nothing. And that's how it started.
What was that first episode like? Were you nervous when you had to sit down? And who was your first guest?
My first guest was John Fulbrook, who wrote on my Instagram post today, #1. He was my first guest. And I asked John to do it because at the time, Emily Oberman, who's here, had invited me to be on the AIGA New York chapter board. And I met John Fulbrook. And John Fulbrook was then the creative director at Simon & Schuster, and he was doing really beautiful book covers. And he was just the most gregarious, talk about anything kind of dude that I had ever met. And so I asked him to be my first guest so that in case I had stage fright and choked, he could just take over and talk for the entire hour. And I was so nervous, I was shaking, and I taped all of John's book covers all over my office. I don't know if Lisa remembers this, with notes that I could refer to, and I had like a stack of research, and John came to my office. I was doing the show live. We were sitting he was sitting across from me at my desk. We were both holding landlines. And I don't know if anybody remembers in the old days when everybody piled on the various landlines in the house to talk to grandma, and how everybody's voice would reverberate. That was exactly the way it was. And so there we were sitting across from each other at a slight time delay. The guys in Arizona from Voice America, who are the producers, which was like working with Wayne and Garth. And I swear they were doing bong hits like, in the background. It was completely surreal, but made it through, and John was my first guest. My second guest was Cheryl Swanson, and the rest is history.
What was the most valuable lesson you learned from your first 100 episodes?
To spend less time on my monologues and more time on my research.
Well, research is, to my mind, one of the hallmarks of Design Matters as it is now. And for people who don't know, Debbie is one of the most comprehensive researchers. I live with her. And so I see the preparation that she does, and it blew my mind because I too have a podcast. And I'm not going to do all that. I'm sorry.
And hers is better, and I'm so jealous because I don't know how she does it. She just knows everything almost like by osmosis.
No, I just fake it. And so Debbie goes really deep, and in every single interview, there's a point where the interviewee says, wow, I can't believe you learned that or you knew that. And so how do you follow your curiosity as you're doing your research to prepare the arc of an interview?
Do you know that feeling when you're surfing online and you go like from rabbit hole to wormhole to rabbit hole to wormhole and you kind of feel guilty because you're like, what am I doing wasting this time? I don't have to feel that way. So I just can riff. I can really truly surf through the internet, find whatever I want to find, listen, read, learn. It's the best part of doing the podcast for me, is the amount of time that I get to spend learning about who I'm interviewing and living their lives in the time that I'm doing the research. I sort of feel like I enter into their lives in a way that I've never experienced before. I kind of take on who they are. The first time that happened, it was, I think, either my first or second season, and back to back, I interviewed Paul Sayre and Helen Curtis. And I suddenly felt like I had become them. And they were both so incredibly creative and so discerning about what they did and didn't do, that it became this sort of journey into actualization, like witnessing people, the most creative people that I knew, living the most creative lives that they could. And it was just this gift. And yeah.
Most of your conversations start early on in a person's life and sort of end not only where they are now, but where they might be headed. What do you think the listener gets from seeing that entire arc?
I hope they get hope, because I'm mostly interested in how people overcome their own obstacles, insecurities, self-sabotage. And I hope that by hearing the journeys that people are taking through their own circuitous lives, that people listening can understand, oh, okay, so Tommy Kail, the director of Hamilton, still wonders if he can wake up the next day and do it again. Like, if he's doing that, I think it's okay for all of us to be doing it too. And that's this sense of optimism that I think people can come away with in recognizing that even the most successful people in the world are still profoundly concerned about being successful tomorrow, or really not so much successful, but still creative tomorrow. Like that, to me, is the most hopeful thing that anyone could get from the podcast.
Do you find yourself at this stage of your career still wondering if you'll be creative tomorrow?
Don't we all?
I hope so.
I mean, you know, one thing that, there's this sort of this interesting tension that I've discovered in thinking about my guests so much now in the lead up to the launch of the book, in that there's, on the one hand, this profound longing, this profound sense of trying to make meaning through in insecurity, in doubt, in hope, and like all of these obstacles that they've encountered, and all the trials and tribulations of trying to live a creative life. So there's that whole aspect that I want to talk about and learn from. But then the other thing that I've realized, and we've been talking about this, and it's sort of interesting to share, is that there's also, on the other side of that, this real depth of purpose in a person's voice when they're being creative, in that even though they might be insecure, they also at the same time feel very comfortable sharing that voice, despite all the insecurities, despite all the self-sabotage, that there's still this sense that what I'm doing matters enough to want to put it out there to share. Mm-hmm. And that's something I just realized, and now I want to sort of understand that better too.
Yeah, we recently saw a play called English at the Atlantic Theater
Company.
And it was about 4 Iranian students taking English as a second language to pass the TOEFL test. And one of the most profound things that we walked away from in the play was this idea that we can only be truly known in our native tongues. and that we have to sacrifice something of ourselves when we have to speak someone else's tongue in order to get a visa or get citizenship or any other thing. And as creative people, I think both of us feel like we are our truest selves when we are creating. And it's interesting to see the ways in which you have to learn different languages to go beyond the creative self and exist in the world where you have to pay a mortgage and things like that. So how do you balance at this stage of your life creativity and the realities of life and showing up to the day job and family and just everything that we deal with in a day or a week or life?
Well, I guess the easy answer would be not well, as you know. For so much of my life, I felt that I was compromising because I felt like I was responding to a childhood of needing to feel secure and safe, and decided that that would be my lead gene. You know, this is what I'm gonna do, so I'm gonna sacrifice all these other things because the most important thing is being safe and secure. And I think that while that is certainly a noble path, I don't know that anything else but working on feeling safe and secure is ever gonna make you feel safe and secure. So all of these other things that I did, all of these other machinations, all the money that you need to earn to feel safe, it doesn't work because whatever you make, you then decide you need more to feel safe because you don't feel safe enough to begin with. So it becomes this hedonic treadmill that you can never get off of unless you figure out first and foremost why you don't feel safe and secure. And being able to rely on yourself is the big lesson here, which I'm still working on because I still don't feel safe and secure. Even though I'm in a wonderful marriage, even though I have a really wonderful career, you know, that terror, it doesn't go away. And this is speaking like after 3 decades of therapy.
With the same therapist.
And she's done a really good job. This isn't like find another therapist. You should be feeling better about yourself by now. Like, there are times where Roxane's like, whatever you pay your therapist, you should be paying her more.
And I mean that in a good way. Because, you know, and Debbie has talked about this, she had a really rough childhood. And not everyone emerges from that kind of trauma as a person who is able to function in the world or function without harming other people to sort of cope with the harm that was done to them. And so like that, she gets up every day and is generally cheerful and friendly and charming and sweet, at least at home. Not like walking down the street. Don't. It's terrifying.
I'm a New Yorker.
She's a New Yorker. In fact, the other day we were walking home and I was like, do you notice that you never move out of the way when someone's coming towards you? And she was like, it would never occur to me. I was like, wow, because I'm like immediately throwing myself into the wall. But anyway, her therapist has done a great job in helping her become the person she is today.
Okay, let's move on.
Yes. Now,
this is technically pillow talk.
it's so good. Speaking of pillow talk, no, I'm just kidding. I didn't want to go home tonight. So you have a book now, your 7th book, in fact, Why Design Matters. And it really is, in many ways, a retrospective of the past 17 years of your very wonderful podcast. What was that experience like to, very few of us have that opportunity to go back through an entire body of work that is actually still in process. So what was that like?
It was both harrowing and daunting and pure joy. I didn't want to listen to the podcasts again because I don't like to listen to myself. So I had them all transcribed. I had about 400 episodes transcribed. And then I, as you know, read through them all. And it was very difficult to make this book because I have so many extraordinary guests. who have said so many extraordinary things. And so I had to sort of establish some criteria for how I was going to decide who was going to get a sort of long form interview and who was going to get quotes. Because I did feel that so much of what so many people said needed to be in the book. The biggest issue was space. I was contracted to do a book of 70,000 words. I was able to convince HarperCollins to let me do 150,000 words. But if you take an hour-long interview and you transcribe it, that's about 10,000 words. And there was no way HarperCollins was going to give me 150,000 words of 10 interviews. So I had to be able to extract some sort of standalone piece that would work without a lot of the beginning and the end to keep it sort of intact. And that was really hard, particularly with artists, because so much of their early life is so important to how they've created their body of work. So with those people, I tried to take one gem out of their interviews that I could then put up on a page. So for all of, I think there's about 70 quotes, those interviews became impossible for me to edit. There was just no way I could keep the integrity, the inherent integrity of those interviews and include them by editing. Just couldn't do it. So they're represented with a big page quote. And then the other 60 or so are extracts that range from about 1,500 to about 4,000 at the max. And those are almost like stories within the interviews that could stand alone. And then the photography. And the photography was the most challenging part because before COVID, I was going to go on a photo shoot and hire a wonderful photographer and take photos of the people that I was going to be including, and then I couldn't. And so I had to actually buy the photography from the photographers. And the criteria there was I needed to be able to feel the soul of that human in the photo, which meant that up until the last moment, I was still negotiating with photographers and people that I was going to be including. Oliver Jeffers kept giving me beautiful photos that were too small. The book is 10 by 10. They needed to be massive. He finally did a photo shoot for me on the last day that I could accept it. And it's a great photo, especially his slippers. Elizabeth Alexander, I had to get a friend to text her to approve a photo I found in deep Google to be able to include, because there was no way I was going to include the Mellon Foundation professional photo that her people gave me. Like, no, I need something that's got soul. And up until the last minute, I was afraid I was going to have to take her out. So there were lots of different pieces that I had to put together, as you know, as you witnessed. I should ask you, so what was that like?
Well, it was awesome. I mean, to watch someone you care about, someone you love, do what they're best at, and do it at just a consistently excellent level was amazing. And I would read through a lot of these interviews, and she's right, they are nearly impossible to cull down. Like a lot of interviews, you can like cut away a bunch of nonsense. But with these, like all of the interview from the first word to the last was really interesting, and there are a finite number of pages in a book. At some point, it's like, wow, we can only charge so much for this book, so we're gonna just have to cut things off. And so for me, it was wonderful.
Yeah, Roxane helped me edit a lot, which was hard because every word of every guest was so precious to me. I don't know if Alex Kalman is here. Alex Kalman did the design of the book, and he just knocked it out of the park. And it was incredibly special for me to work with Alex because his parents, Tibor Kalman and Myra Kalman, were so important to me in sort of my formulation as a human. And so when my agent Charlotte Sheedy recommended that I work with Alex, I was like, wow, that would just be such an incredible circuitous loop for me, because Tibor and Tibor's work at M & Company with Emily and Douglas Riccardi and Stephen Doyle and Alex Isley, they changed my life. Just the work made me decide to change my life. And the fact that between Tibor's influence and then Myra's influence as an artist and as a visual essayist, that impacted me so much that the idea that I could work with Alex became wonderfully shared, as we'd say in my grandmother's house.
So the cover is very interesting to me because every time I look at it, I see something different. And it's not the cover I was going to expect because Debbie is an aesthete. She loves beautiful things, refuses to look at ugly things. And the cover is so interesting because it's both designed and then organic. So how did you settle with Alex on this cover?
Well, it was a really challenging cover. HarperCollins, I was working with another amazing designer who I worship, Paul Sayre, and then Chip Kidd. HarperCollins kept rejecting the covers. So much so that I really didn't know if I was gonna make this book. And then Alex did a few covers. I didn't love them, but he did one with a question mark, a giant question mark, but the dot of the question mark. Tobias Jones is here, I should ask him what's that called. What's that dot called? Or maybe that's not Tobias. Looks like him with the mask, but maybe not. It's not Tobias, sorry. Sorry, person who looks like Tobias. I'm sorry. In any case, the dot, he scribbled. And it's like, I don't like the question mark, but I love the scribble. So let's try that. And we did, I think, 98 scribbles. 68 are used in the book because we decided to take those scribbles and use them as the end points of each interview and each essay.
You are a perfectionist.
That's why I'm married to you. Go on.
So now the book is out in the world. How does it feel on release day? And why does design matter as far as you're concerned?
Well, it feels somewhat euphoric and surreal that this is happening and that I'm looking in the audience and think I'm recognizing a lot of people. I think that's Deborah Cass.
Yeah, I saw her.
Okay, well, just because of the Tobias mix-up. And I'm just grateful that so many amazing people came out on this rainy Tuesday to be here and share this with me. That's everything. Thank you. Thank you. And why does design matter?
Yeah, why does design matter?
Because design is intention, and we decide every minute of every day how we want to live our lives. And it's not just about the things in our lives, it's also about the directions that we take, which is the sort of scribble, and the various ways we engage and find other people to design with.
Now, you are about to embark on your 18th season of Design Matters. How do you stay invested over that long, and what are you looking forward to over the next season?
Interviewing more amazing people. You know, there's still a Michelle Obama interview, maybe. No, but it's not even that. It's just the opportunity to be exposed to the most creative people in the world, so many of which are in here, and having the opportunity to get sort of paid to be nosy and ask them anything I want to ask about this sort of glorious, messy life that we're all living and designing and making it through.
I can't wait. The last season was particularly good.
37 episodes in 2021.
Now, what makes for you as an interviewer a good interview?
Somebody willing to talk. Somebody willing to join me on the journey and go deep.
Now, I know a lot of accomplished people tend to, at certain points, especially when they're promoting a project, they have a canned answer. And they don't mean to, but you just develop a series of answers because frankly you're going to be asked the same questions over and over again. How do you break through that force field of sort of just, wow, yes, this is why I love this book, and get people to give you something a little more authentic?
Asking different questions. So that's why it's so important for me to do the research. So what I've started to do in addition to reading the books or listening to the music or looking at the work and the TED Talks and videos is I've actually started listening to a lot of other podcasts with those guests. So Krista Tippett, Dak Shepard, Terry Gross, Howard Stern, Tim Ferriss, of course, and then I have those transcribed. And then I read through them, and then I'll highlight the things that I don't want to ask about specifically, but ask about their answers. So I try not to ask the same questions that they're being asked. I try to ask them in a different way and take answers that they've already given, which then makes them really feel happy and seen because they clearly know that I've paid attention, and then takes the conversation in a completely different direction.
Have you ever had a difficult interview?
And not Roxane.
Oh yeah, no, definitely not me.
Well, you were difficult to get to the interview.
Yes.
I had to chase you.
Yes, I blew her off with my publicists. I was like, go talk to Amanda.
And then Amanda never wrote back.
But Amanda left HarperCollins.
Now this is dinner table conversation.
Yeah.
Forget the pillow talk.
Yeah, she left HarperCollins, and then I was like, I'll go talk to my other publicist, Kate. And I was like, I'm done with interviews for a while. Because I had just done a lot of press and I didn't want to. So you didn't have to work for it. That is very true.
But you were a wonderful interview.
Thank you.
I think everybody that's listened to the show knows that my most difficult interview was Richard Saul Werman. And it's so funny because he owns it now.
Mm-hmm.
He really owns it because it's one of the few that I can point to and say he really put me through the ringer. He's talked about how difficult he was that day, but ultimately how he respected where I was coming from and how I kind of put him in his place.
Mm-hmm.
But I think I did it in an elegant way.
I hope so. Do you ever worry? I get a lot of anxiety before an interview, like even today. Do you worry about where the conversation is going to go, and how do you manage that kind of anxiety while also conveying the confidence that you do?
Well, I do feel very nervous before every interview, even people I know well, because I'm worried that I'm going to not do a good enough job. And then last year, because I had the opportunity to interview like Ricky Lee Jones, who's one of my heroes, it was terrifying. It was actually terrifying to be through Zoom, seeing her and looking at her. And I felt like from reading her memoir and owning everything she's ever recorded, and spending so much of my formative life listening to her music, which I felt like in many ways was the soundtrack of my life. To be sitting across from her was surreal. And then when she started singing, I'm like, whose life is this? How did that happen? So I get really nervous before every single interview. I never feel like I've done enough research. I'm always working up until the last minute, reorganizing my questions, reorganizing sort of the way in which I wanted to start the conversation and end the conversation. But it is something that I truly enjoy. And that moment when you're talking to someone and you know that they know that you know that they know that you're clicking, that's gold.
Who are 3 dream guests?
We're being told time.
Oh, no, time to. Yeah.
Oh, for the question. Okay.
Yeah.
Joni Mitchell.
Oh yeah, that would be great.
Right.
Yeah,
Joni Mitchell.
you would do good with Joni. Like, excuse me, Joni, she has everything you've ever made on CD and vinyl. Yeah, no, that would be good.
And digital.
Yeah. We just got this amazing box set. It's
Yeah.
great.
So Joni, Michelle Obama, Hillary Clinton.
That would be interesting. You know, I would love to see an interview with you and Hillary Clinton and sort of like getting into it. Like, how do you recover from that kind of a loss?
Yeah.
Because I honestly don't know how she woke up and then was like, I'm gonna still fight the good fight. Because I would have been like, peace out, bitches.
And now Beyonce,
Oh, yeah.
right? We would both love to do that one.
Yeah, but I think we would both want a real interview with Beyonce and not a Beyonce-controlled interview with Beyonce. With respect. I'll hail God, but even God should answer real questions. Yes, good choices. So we would love to take some questions from the audience, and so feel free to raise your hand, and someone will approach you with a microphone. Though this is a nice intimate room, so I think we probably will be able to manage.
Because I don't think anybody wants like the germs of the microphone.
Oh, the ring masks.
Oh, that's true.
Good thinking. We forgot to disinfect these.
Elizabeth.
People always say, oh my God, she's got a voice made for the business. Have you gotten voice coaching? How do you have this beautiful residence?
I have not got, so the question is, did I have voice training? Elizabeth was giving me compliments on my voice. So this is like my real voice. This is my radio voice.
When she does it in real life, I'm like, ooh, podcast voice.
There's something about the microphone and the headphones that sort of gets me into this, I'm Allison, the songbird of my youth. But yeah, it's all put on. I'm a New Yorker. So back in the day, I had somebody say, how the end quote is, we can talk about making a difference, we can make a difference, or we can do both. I'm Debbie Millman, and I look forward to talking with you again soon. Well, for those eagle-eared out there, I used to say, I'm Debbie Millman, and I look forward to talking to you. And somebody pointed it out to me, and so ever since I've tried to overcorrect. I look forward to talking with you again soon.
Yeah, every time we come, so we split our time between here and Los Angeles, and every time we come back to New York, after 2 or 3 days, yeah.
Forward, toward, and coffee.
Yeah. Brooklyn W is like right back. It's great. Other questions? Yes.
Hi, I'm here from DC. Thanks for having me. What advice do you have for people who are creative but not necessarily in a creative space professionally, in terms of honing that creativity? And do you think everyone is creative?
I'll repeat the question. So I think this is the question. What advice would we give to people that are creative, but not necessarily in a creative job, but want to, what was this, the last part?
Like hone that creativity.
And hone that creativity.
And then also, do you think everyone is creative?
And part B to that question is, do I think everyone is creative? So, do you want to answer that, or do you want me to? Okay. So, I started Design Matters as an entirely self-generated project. So what I would say is, don't wait for your employer to allow you to be creative. Make your own things. And Stefan Sackmeister once said, now's the time to make everything you ever wanted to make. And I love that quote, because we're all waiting for something to happen in the future. And yet now is the time we should just start making things that we've always wanted to make. And so if there's something that you want to make, just make it. And if you don't know what it is you want to make, but you want to make something, experiment until you find what it is you want to make. And I would also recommend, since we're at a bookstore, reading Seth Godin's book, The Practice, because it's a wonderful book at really understanding our motivation for making things. And a lot of people now are making things for an audience, or for likes, or followers, and there's something really important about remembering why we want to make things to begin with, and just making them and putting them out there, and just allowing the work to just be out there. And so think about why you might be worried about putting something out there. If nobody looked at it, what could it be? And then see if that inspires you to make something. And then, do I think everybody's born creative? Yes. And I would listen to the interview that I did with Linda Barry, because she talks about empirical evidence as to why that's true, and how by the 3rd grade we sort of get it pushed out of us in seeing that while we all love to draw and make things and build, and I'm talking about people that are living in a sort of place where they have crayons and Legos and things, because not everybody gets that. But for those that do, that kids just tend naturally to be that way. But then by the time we get to 3rd grade and we see, oh, that girl, Catherine, sitting next to me, she draws grass better than I do. And this really happened to me. She had really cool bangs and she could do grass. And I was like, oh, I can't do grass as good as her, so I shouldn't do it anymore. And that becomes the way we're socialized. And that becomes allowed. And so I think the more we encourage young people to make things no matter what, their creativity will continue to blossom. Thanks for that question.
Excellent. Yes.
Hi, thank you. It's so exciting to be here and listen to you for the first time in person. My question is, what do you think is the one thing that ties together all the people that you have interviewed in the past?
So the question is, what ties all the people together that I've interviewed in the past? I think that I admire them. That I only interview people that I want to interview. 99% of the people I've interviewed are people that I've gone out and asked to be on the show. I will only interview people that I respect and whose work moves me. And so that's like the through line. And then secondarily, I would say the extraordinary body of work that they've produced. Thank you.
Yes.
Taryn, that's Taryn. It is.
Hi, Debbie, for as long as I've known you, I have been so blown away about all the things that you do, right? You're a magic maker. And I'm curious, what does present Debbie dream for future Debbie? What is out there that you haven't dreamed up yet, or what are you dreaming about now that we can look forward to?
Oh my God, these questions are so deep. Well, Roxane has been urging me to write a memoir. And so,
Debbie's a really good writer. She's very modest, but she's a really good writer. And yeah, I think she would write a beautiful memoir.
so I'm a little scared about this, very, very hesitant. I don't feel like I'm good enough to do that, but that's a whole separate conversation we can have over dinner. But it would be a visual memoir. Like I would want to illustrate pieces of it. We do have a title though.
It's a good start.
It's called Please.
Which is her favorite word.
Because of all the I've been painting the word please for years. This is not like a recent revelation, like, oh, I came up with the title of my book. It's one of those things like, wow, since I was 29, I've been painting that word over and over and over and over again. And there's so much to it, you know, there's that whole people pleasing thing that we try to combat, and the whole desire for something you can't have. And yeah, there we go.
Thank you.
Yes.
Just to take a page out of your book, when you were asked about something earlier, you alluded to people pursuing likes on social media, creating for those purposes. Could you reflect a little more on that and how you value that type of creativity as opposed to maybe some of the creators in your book that are really trying to advance the culture of so meaningful?
Oh my God, I can't believe you're sitting in front of Tim Goodman, who could answer this question so much more eloquently, because I've learned so much from him about the vulnerability he brings to the world through his work. And I see so many people nodding. It's so true.
Very funny.
It's amazing. Like, I wish that you could just come up here, Tim, and tell everybody. Because I've learned it from him. And he has a way of showing who he is in the most authentic, natural, not overwrought, not horsey, not put upon, just who he is, take me or leave me. And it's shown me that you can be that way without having to feel humiliated by who you are, and just how much people resonate with that realness. And it's given me so much courage to be more real in my own work. I've been ashamed of so many things for so long, my childhood, my career, whatever. And the more you share who you are, the more people actually resonate. And so now it's really more about how can I try to tell the truth with my work as opposed to chase for likes or followers or whatever. So thank you, Tim. Love you, Tim.
Yes.
Riffing on Taryn's question, you said in the past that when you found design, you sort of set aside a lot of the creative hats that you wore prior. consultant, you podcast author, all of this. Now that you've sort of blossomed and found all of this professional success, do you feel like there are hats that you want to put back on? Do you feel like there's space for that, or do you feel like all these things that you do now are sort of enough for you creatively?
What a great question. Well, I still have this very, very deep-seated desire to be a cabaret singer. And I sing all the time. The problem here is that as wonderful as Elizabeth might think my speaking voice is, my singing voice not so much. So I think that might just end up being a fantasy. But who knows?
I think you should go for it. She sings every day, and she also makes up songs. No. You were gonna do
Want to
it.
sing a fluffy?
No.
We have a dog song we sing to our dog. It's called the Fluffinator song. Right, okay, I'm gonna stop.
It's a great song, though, I have to say. It's got 3 verses.
He co-wrote it, Lennon and McCartney style.
Sing the song.
No.
No, the internet's forever. Yeah, we have lost our minds over this little dog. The other day I was telling a friend he's the Beyonce of our house. It is, it's the truth. When I left today, his little face was at the window, which he always does whenever we leave the house. And it's just like, I don't deserve to live.
Time for a couple more? Yeah? There's a question right behind me.
So practical.
Oh, okay. I was gonna guess who you were, but I realized as soon as you said as soon as I heard your voice, you're not.
I
I was
know.
like,
The practical, possibly stupid question: when you're doing a podcast, do you share the questions up front with your guests, or how do you do that? Because if someone asks me a question, it's like 5 minutes while I think of an answer, sort of thing. I mean, how do you do that?
the question is, do I share my questions in advance? And I do not. And I never will. Well, maybe unless Joni wants them.
Joni, maybe.
Michelle and Hillary,
But you know what? I don't know that she would ask for
Joni.
them. I don't know that she would ask for them.
So no, I don't. I don't want canned answers, and I don't want people to have to think. There are pauses. Sometimes there are long pauses between my asking the question and my guest answering. But I have a great producer, and he takes all of those pauses out. So it just has like a nice bantery feel to it. For my students that might be here or in the past have witnessed my shows live, like Priya Parker's here, I interviewed her live, thank you Priya. I make mistakes, I say things the wrong way, I get corrected sometimes, and so all of that comes out. So the actual podcast that you hear is touched by Curtis in every good possible way. Thank you for that question. Yes.
Hi there, thank you so much for this. I just had a question because you commented on having anxiety before you interview a guest. So I'm curious, after hundreds of interviews, did you still experience imposter syndrome? And how do you channel confidence to get through to the flow as you interview?
So the question is, because I did say that I feel a lot of anxiety before the shows, do I still experience imposter syndrome? And what was the last part of it?
And how do you channel confidence and get into a state of flow? As
And how do I channel confidence and get into a state of flow?
yeah.
So imposter syndrome is sort of an interesting thing, because if you feel like you're an imposter, it means you think that somebody else thinks more highly of you than you do. But I don't ever feel that way. Like I just am always battling being enough. So I don't know about like the imposter part. I just feel like bad most of the time about myself. Which is not, I'm not lying.
No. No, but she does have a personal cheerleader who literally like follows her around the house all day.
You
Like,
mean Matt?
No.
I know we get such joy out of joking.
It's so funny, but only to us. But yeah.
So I work on it. I really work on it, but one thing that I did learn from Danny Shapiro, who in an after conversation, after the podcast, which I've talked about a lot, she had seen after the episode where I interviewed her, she came back into my office at SVA, and she saw a stack of confidence books on my desk. That season, quite a lot of books had come out about confidence, and I tend to buy those. At that time, I thought it was the holy grail. Like, this is what I want. This is it. Confidence. If I have that, I've got everything. And so she looked at the stack of books, and she was very dismissive, and she said, oh, I think confidence is really overrated. I'm like, wow. It's the holy grail. And she's like, no. She said, most people that are really confident, like apparently confident, she used the word A-H, and they're kind of jerky. And she said, what I think is much more important than confidence is courage. To like step into that uncertainty of doing something. And I spent a lot of time after that because I believed it. She said that and it just resonated through me, and I've talked about it ever since. And ultimately I spent the next year trying to define confidence. Like, what is confidence? And ultimately I decided that confidence is the successful repetition of any endeavor. Like, you go into something uncertain with enough prediction, enough pattern recognition from your past to recognize that chances are you're going to be successful at doing this thing. For those of us that drive, we have car confidence. We turn on a light switch, we have light confidence. We know it's going to work because it's worked that many times in the past. And when you're trying out something new, or you're doing something for the first time, interviewing somebody I have never interviewed before, there's no way I'm going to feel confident interviewing them. I might feel confident about my research because I know that it's good, which is why I do it, but I don't know how it's going to go. And the DNA that we have, we will never, ever, ever, ever be really deeply okay with uncertainty. Because any vulnerability sets off the alarm bells in our reptilian brain, which hates anything that's uncertain or unsafe making. And so because I know that, I just know that my being nervous is sort of a signal that it's super important to me. And I try to see it through that lens. I hope that's helpful.
Yes, in the back. Yes, you.
Hello. Debbie, I discovered you by listening to Tim Ferriss, and I listened to the interview you had with him. And I heard the beginning of the interview here, when you mentioned one of your experience to not be creative tomorrow. Well, it's not be creative tomorrow. And so when I think about what you're saying today in regards to what I listened from Tim Ferriss, I'm wondering, what do you do to feed your creative brain?
Oh, what a wonderful question. Thank you. So this person asked the question that they listened to my podcast with Tim Ferriss, who's one of the most important interviews I've ever done, his interview with me and my interview with him. And based on the things that they're hearing today, where do I find, or how do I nourish my creativity? Yeah. I read incessantly. I don't read the same way that Roxane reads. Roxane reads every night for like 2 hours. Nonfiction mostly. No, I'm sorry, fiction mostly. I read mostly nonfiction. And we watch a lot of movies, we watch a lot of television, we spend a lot of time talking about Beyonce.
So much. It's always great.
But
She's our like sort of hall pass third together.
But I think just there's so many people in this room whose work has inspired me. Deborah Cass, Anand, Bria, Alyssa, her wife, Susan. Everybody that is in my life inspires me. Emily Oberman, Lisa, Grant. There's so many people. My students, Olivia Grant is here. I get it from everywhere. What about you, Roxane?
Well, reading a lot, And I actually, for pleasure, I read a lot for work as well, because of the various things that I do. And of course my students' work, which is always exciting because I'm teaching an undergraduate class this semester, and undergrads are just so great. They're just like, I'm gonna do what I'm gonna do. And you're just gonna love it. And I'm like, yes, I am. Please tell me how to reinvent grammar. I'm absolutely here for it. And I actually find students in teaching very, very creatively nourishing, because my students, especially undergraduates, graduate students are tough because they kind of think they know everything and that they can't be taught. And at least in my experience, they're very resistant to reading as a form of learning how to write. And I am very engaged with the idea that in order to be a good writer, you have to be a good reader. And so undergrads will just sort of do whatever you tell them to do. And that's very pleasing in lots of ways. And so to see the risks that they're willing to take in their work always encourages me to maybe take a risk on the page myself. Like, if they're gonna do that, like, why don't I try that? And so teaching is really very creatively sustaining.
Thank you for that question. The person next to Taryn.
Hi, thank you so much for doing this. You mentioned studying transcripts. I'm curious about question asking, and what have you learned about asking questions by studying prior interviews, and how can we be better question askers in our work?
That's a good question. So the question is, I've studied a lot of transcripts and analyzed how people ask questions. And what have I learned in that process of analyzing other people's questions?
Yeah.
Well, I just want to also say that I tend to only listen or read the transcripts of interviewers that I really respect and like. So I'm learning by that. I tend not to, well, I mean, I guess I learned from even the bad interviews too that I listened to. I was just doing some Webby judging, which was blowing my mind about the questions that some people ask. You know, there are certain, I'm very, very discriminatory about questions. And having learned to ask questions, like the things that I really can't stand are when people ask, so, tell me about yourself. How did you get where you are? I'm like, dude, I'm 60. How long do you want me to talk? So I always try to ask a question that can be answered. That somebody is going to enjoy answering. The last thing I want to do is bore my guest with a dumb question. And make them do the work that is my job. You know, a lot of people ask me, what do I need to do to prepare to be on the show? Nothing. Come as you are. You don't have to do any work, you don't have to prepare. That's my job. I want you to come and enjoy yourself and have a conversation about you, about what you make and how you make it and what you've earned the right to talk about. And I don't want to make it something that is annoying to them or a burden in any way. And so I love to ask questions that are going to be able to further their ideas about what they do. And if the question doesn't do that to me, it's certainly not going to do that to them. I hope that is helpful. I don't mean to put down other interviewers. It's just that that's just a very hard way to enter into a generous conversation when somebody makes the guest do the work. Tim.
Hi. Just playing off of that, I'm curious, is there a moment that sticks out when you walk away from an interview regretting, like having not gone somewhere, or asking the wrong question, or, you know, any number of things? Any moments that stand out, or does that happen?
Well, no, I mean, it's so interesting because I don't know that, no. The one time I did, the one time I came away from an interview thinking, oh my God, I think I might have screwed up, was when I interviewed Krista Tippett. And I interviewed Krista Tippett studio to studio. I didn't see her. And I really need to connect with a person visually when I'm doing my interviews. So Zoom has been okay actually because I can still like deeply look. But with Krista, it was studio to studio and I didn't see her. And I was very nervous because I was interviewing, you know, one of the greats. I also wanted to be good enough to her. And when I was done, I asked Curtis, my producer, how did I do? And it's like, he's a man of very few words and he only tells the truth. And he said, well, you know, when you guys were talking about depression, I really wished you'd asked her how she got out of her depression. And I was like, what? I didn't ask her that. I was so mortified that in that moment I decided I'm never doing another interview where I'm not looking at the person ever again. So when Philip Glass's people called and said he'd like to do the interview but not face to face, I said no. Big regret. So fast forward a few years, I'm prepping for the book, and I'm reading my transcripts, and I'm reading Krista's, and guess what? I asked her. I'm like, God damn it, Curtis, how could you not have been paying attention? So yeah. I have a couple of regrets about my interview with Richard Saul Werman, but we won't go into that. Yes.
So, you talked about confidence, and you talked about going for, earlier you talked about just going for your creative impulses and creating the work. And I was wondering, how do you, in your work and also in all of the people that you've interviewed, where does ego play into your own direction? Because I think that helps drive conviction, right? As design leads conviction, so does ego on some level. And so how does that play into the interplay between like being humble and being like having this learning sensibility versus being so sure in yourself to do the work?
Great question. Do people need me to repeat that? Did everybody hear it okay? Okay, good, because that was a hard question to paraphrase. I've been working on teaching a class now about podcasting and how to construct and ask questions. And I had to really deconstruct a lot of what I'm doing and codify it in a way that I haven't really been doing before, and realize that in a really good interview, you have to control everything except your guest. You have to control the environment so that they're comfortable. You have to control everything, the technology, the lighting, the temperature, all of it to make sure that they're comfortable. But you can't control the guest. And you have to be able to give up that ego in the interview and be completely and utterly aware of every single thing the guest is doing. Am I asking a question that they don't like? Am I pushing too hard? When to pull back? When to keep going? When to cut out a whole section of questions? That's the hardest job, because I work so hard for those questions. And then when I sense that it's either not the right time to ask them, they're not gonna have any interest, or they move ahead in their chronology to a place that eliminates the need for those questions, then I just have to let go. I have to just go with who they are and what they want and what they're doing. And the lack of ego in doing that is almost painful. Because I'm proud of those questions and I want to ask them, but I can't, because they've taken the interview to a whole other place, and there's no room for them. And if I did ask them, it would pull them back into a place that they've already moved away from. So that's the hardest part. Also knowing, because I do so much research and I start with so much information, knowing or deciding what to cut out in the preparation of the questions is also really hard. And I have to really push myself. Is this in the service of my wanting to know, or is this in the service of continuing their sort of journey? And that's hard too. and then I have to pull those out also. So I have to constantly be checking my ego, because of the things I just want to know, but then I can't always know. Thanks for that question.
Do one more.
One more.
This right there.
I think one
Is that Debbie?
Yeah, it is.
Hi, Debbie Lafleur.
I think one of the experiences of listening to your podcast is not only do you ask incredible questions, but you're just a phenomenal listener yourself. And I'm wondering if you had tips for us in general about what makes good listening and how you pay such close attention to the people in the moment who you're speaking with.
So Debbie asked about the act of listening and how have I learned to listen and any tips on how to listen. So it's very interesting. In my very second interview, so John Fulbrook was first, Cheryl Swanson was second. At the end of the interview with Cheryl, who is my friend, I also liked asking Curtis, how'd I do? Expecting, great job. And she said, well, you know that anything starts like that, doesn't it? She said, well, I think you'd be better if you listened to my answers before you queued up the next question in your mind. And I was like, okay, as only a friend can tell you. And I realized, like, a lot of people like talk, then they stop talking. Oh no, I'm sorry. People talk, then they stop listening while somebody else is talking. So they're really only listening to themselves. And then they wait for somebody to finish talking so they can start talking again. And then sort of the opposite with a podcast. You have to be really hyper aware of everything. And I think just because of my childhood, I've become very hyper aware and constantly weighing, is this okay, is that okay, is this person mad at me, is that person mad at me? Looking for every single cue to be able to analyze where I am in the world. And that's a good quality to have as an interviewer, even though it comes from sort of a crazy place. But, you know, it all makes sense now, so let's synthesize our happiness, as Dan Gilbert would say. But, so I think just being hyper aware of everything, and then also listening really deeply as a cue to know what to ask next. And so if I'm not really listening, if I'm not paying attention, I'm not really able to ask the next question in the most sort of honest and generous way. And that's what I want to try to be able to do. So it requires, like, I can't have any other stimulation. It has to be really focused. And I've learned how to just cut out everything and just hyper focus on my guests. Anybody that's been in my studio has probably experienced it. Those that I've been doing it with Zoom probably haven't as much, but it requires like hyper focus. And I kind of love that because I can get out of my head. I can completely eliminate my being for that hour or so and just be with them. And I love that. Even with the masks, there's so many people that I'm seeing and recognizing, and I'm so grateful that you're here, and so honored and so touched. Thank you, thank you, thank you.